All right, welcome back into Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. Let's get the latest on the Middle East with Dr. Alon Burstein. As always, Alon. It's good to see you. There's a lot to get into. Let's start off with Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority. Mahmoud Abbas called Hamas sons of dogs in a heated speech where he also demanded Hamas release the remaining hostages, disarm, and hand over control of Gaza in order to end the war with Israel. Alone, the dynamic between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas is a facet of the war that I've always found fascinating. What kind of pull does the Palestinian Authority have in Gaza? Do Abbas's words carry weight in Gaza?
It's good to see you, Austin. I think that we have to understand why Mahmoud Abbas is all of a sudden, long after the war broke out, and he came under a lot of pressure from the Biden administration and from Israel to condemn Hamas and call them to release hostages. Why all of a sudden now? And really, what we're seeing is possibly Abbas taking advantage of the fact that Hamas's governing capabilities in Gaza are weakening. While Hamas's military capabilities, according to at least the IDF intelligence, have not nearly weakened as much as Israel would like, they have lost a lot of control on the ground. One of the things that we've seen over the past months has been an increase in all of a sudden sporadic protests that are happening in the Gaza Strip of Palestinians that are calling for condemning Israel, but also condemning Hamas and calling for an end to the war. And all of a sudden, the Palestinian Authority, which, as you sort of implied, doesn't really have a pull in the Gaza Strip, is all of a sudden seeing an opportunity. The Palestinian Authority is in a very interesting position because it controls parts of the West Bank. Other parts are controlled by Israel. And, internationally, it is the recognized Palestinian body and government. A lot of voices internationally have called for some sort of agreement between Israel and the Palestinian Authority to take over the Gaza Strip. However, it is very weak on the Palestinian street. It doesn't have a lot of support. And also, it is really not respected or recognized by the Israeli government. The current Israeli government views the Palestinian Authority as a major threat unto itself. So Abbas has been in this very weakened position regionally while the entire world has been calling for a deal between Israel and the Palestinian Authority locally with the Palestinians and with Israel. He has been relatively weak. I think he's all of a sudden seeing an opportunity here. He's all of a sudden seeing that Palestinians in Gaza are starting to get fed up with Hamas and where Hamas has taken them. The governing capabilities of Hamas to suppress those protests in Gaza are clearly weakening because they're not managing to suppress them. And he's trying to seize an opportunity, maybe to signal to the world, keep on investing in me as the potential opportunity. Maybe I'll be able to come back and have some sort of presence in the Gaza Strip. I think that's where this is all of a sudden coming from, this call.
So let's talk about Gaza. It's been a while since you and I have really gotten to get into the nitty gritty with Gaza. The IDF has been busy in Gaza as of late alone. What have you been tracking?
So the IDF has been operating, maybe I'll show you in the map in a minute. The IDF has been really operating in two main regions in the Gaza Strip. And one of them is in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. That's in Gaza City up here. And it's really been operating in the areas of Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun, also Jabalia refugee camp, and really has been moving further and further into Gaza City and has been evacuating Palestinians to the southern parts or the central parts of the Gaza Strip. But the main other arena that the IDF is operating is in southern Gaza. In southern Gaza, the IDF has excavated a new corridor that it calls the Morag Corridor, going from this area of the border with Israel all the way to the sea that really separates Han Yunis, the largest city in Gaza, from Rafah, the most southern city. The IDF has taken over this corridor and is really investing a lot of troops into Rafah right now, really excavating the tunnels in that area and sort of purging Hamas activity in that region. So far in the Gaza Strip, we have yet to see any real combat on the ground between Hamas and the IDF. Something that we spoke about, the ceasefire broke down a month ago, broke down on March 18th. The IDF has been invading with ground forces. Hamas thus far has been firing rockets at Israel and has been firing mortars at IDF troops. It has not engaged in active combat with Israel, except for a grand total of 3 incidents, only one of which was confirmed Hamas militants. The rest were Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Thus far, Hamas seems to be reserving its forces. The IDF estimates Hamas still has 20,000 fighters left, but it's been reserving its forces maybe for a future battle. And that really leaves us in this weird position where the IDF is operating very heavily in the Gaza Strip without a lot of combat. One more thing I'll say about its activities in southern Gaza. The IDF has been talking about looking at the current military operation as part of a pressure mechanism to try to compel Hamas into another truce, rather than saying it's going to take over the entire Gaza Strip now, increasing the military pressure gradually in order to try to get Hamas to accept another truce. One of the things that the IDF has said is that it is considering taking the entire area. If you want to expand the camera on me for a second, I'll show this entire area south of the Morag corridor, the entire city of Rafah. The IDF is considering making that a buffer zone, a new buffer zone that will be no man's land from this corridor here to the southern border with Egypt. If that were to happen, that would be a game changer. Rafah housed about 500,000 Palestinians prior to the war. It is a fifth of the Gaza Strip. And if the IDF does in fact do that, it'll be a major escalation and will really be a new phase in the war. So far the IDF is threatening that, possibly as a pressure mechanism to threaten Hamas into something. But right now, that I would say would be the biggest escalation if and when that actually would take place.
Talk about Hamas's behavior as of late. You and I were talking a little bit offline. There's been more hostage video releases as of late, correct?
Absolutely. Every couple of days, Hamas is releasing a hostage video. And interestingly, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad also releasing their own hostage videos. And I really take this as part of those organizations' strategies at this point. Once again, they're not engaging the IDF on the ground. Possibly they're reserving their forces. They've learned a lot from the previous rounds of fighting, but really they have recognized that their only leverage at this point is the hostages. The IDF is continuing to advance in Gaza. Hamas could inflict a lot of damage on the IDF, but it can't stop their advance forever. And we saw this in the previous rounds of the war. There was a lot of fighting, IDF casualties, but at the end of the day, the IDF did take over northern Gaza. At the end of the day, it did take over Khan Yunis, it did take over Rafah. So similarly, right now, Hamas is reserving its forces possibly for a future fight, but meanwhile, its leverage is the hostages. Every couple of days, including today, Hamas released a hostage video of Omir Miran. He is a 48-year-old hostage. Today is his birthday. In the video, he says that he is marking his second birthday in captivity. He actually shows a cake with a candle, says his captors made it for him. And one of the things that he talks about, and that the hostages in the previous videos talked about also, is a growing phenomenon within Israeli society, which is more and more reserve units that are saying they are not willing to continue with the war. There has been a new phenomenon in the last couple of weeks. Different reserve soldiers have started new petitions in Israel saying they are not willing to continue the war, which seemingly has no end in sight, which is being compared somewhat to the United States in Vietnam. It's looking as by now sunken costs and pouring more and more in without a strategy. And the hostages themselves are saying, we ask Israelis to continue that because the only way we'll get out of here is with a ceasefire. I bring that up because that tells us a couple of things. It tells us that Hamas is listening to what's happening in Israel. Obviously, the hostages hear what's going on through Hamas. There's a question about how much of what they say is dictated by Hamas. According to the hostages that were released, they weren't dictated word for word what they were supposed to say, but they were told broadly in hostage videos what they're supposed to say. But all this is part of the dynamic. Hamas is trying to really use the hostages and leverage the internal pressure in Israel as much as possible to compel the country to sort of give up on its military plans. And Hamas is doing this while trying to not fight Israel on the ground. Obviously, it will if things escalate, but that's really how I read these hostage videos coming out right now.
Let's get to our viewer question. We do have one in from Diana in Grand Junction. You and I have had, and Hal Kempfer have had lots of conversations about how the death toll is calculated in Gaza. Diana asks, has the Palestinian death toll been confirmed by someone other than the Hamas Ministry of Health? So the Gaza Ministry of Health alone, we've had discussions about how they get their numbers, but I like that question because it asks, why isn't it that we get numbers from any other outside entities? What's the challenge with that?
So I'll say a couple of things about that. The Ministry of Health in the Gaza Strip is, in fact, one of the ministries of the Hamas-led government. However, it is not historically seen as one of the propaganda arms of the government. Within the Hamas government, there are two ministries that report the number of deaths. One of them is the Ministry of Health. The other is the Ministry of Communications, the one that's in charge of talking to the media. The Ministry of Communications is seen as a propaganda arm. It always publishes figures that are far higher. It is already saying over 65,000 people have been killed in the Gaza Strip, and its numbers are unconfirmed. The Ministry of Health in the Gaza Strip reports the numbers by looking at the records of hospitals in the Gaza Strip, and I know it's a little bit gruesome, how many bodies have gone through hospitals in the Gaza Strip. The challenge of having other other entities confirm that is that there really are not that many other entities in the Gaza Strip. There is activity of the World Health Organization. There are activities of other international NGOs. Most of them do confirm the numbers of the Palestinian Health Ministry, but there's no all-encompassing body that monitors and has access to those figures like the Palestinian Health Ministry. So on the one hand, a lot of us are relying on those figures that are coming solely from that body. On the other hand, I will say a couple of things about the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip. First of all, historically, it has been proven to be relatively accurate when it came to rounds of violence between Israel and Hamas in 2009, 2012, 2014, 2018. The numbers that were reported by the Palestinian Health Ministry when, after the violence died down, the numbers were looked at by international bodies, they were pretty much confirmed. So it's been shown historically to be fairly accurate. In addition to that, I'll say Israel does not report how many Palestinians it estimates are killed in the Gaza Strip, but when it does say what it thinks its ratio is of how many militants to civilians, and it does say how many militants it thinks were killed, that those numbers also pretty much add up, which is why when we put those things together, I tend to rely on the figures of the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip as being fairly accurate. But one more caveat, it's very important to remember that the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip does not distinguish between militants and civilians. It is reporting currently about 51,300 Palestinians who have been killed in the Gaza Strip. It says those are the amount of Palestinians. Israel says about 17,000 militants were killed. Palestinian Health Ministry doesn't say who's a civilian, who's a militant. It simply says the total number. That's what we could say about how accurate they are. They're not confirmed by anyone else, but if we put all the data that we have together, it's considered relatively reliable compared to the other ministries, like the communications ministry, which has been proven to be very unreliable.
One more thing before we go, Alon. Let's talk about Iran, the nuclear negotiations. The Washington Times put out this op-ed today. It's called "Take Out Iran's Nuclear Facilities Now." They say before they use basketball as a reference here, so hang with me if you will for a moment. They say before basketball's 24-second rule, there was a tactic called freezing the ball, where the team ahead would attempt to run out the clock by holding the ball as long as possible in order to deny the opposing team an opportunity to score. Cal Thomas, in this piece, argues that it looks like this is what Iran is doing. They're freezing negotiations while finishing the final stages of nuclear enrichment on the way to building a deliverable nuclear weapon. Alon, I bring this up because the Trump administration has previously made it clear that they want to take the negotiation route when it comes to nuclear talks so far. Why is it that no one is, quote, taking out Iran's nuclear facilities now?
So Trump himself has, as we've said, he's always been unpredictable. And he has flipped when it comes to what should be the approach to Iran. You know, in 2018, he pulled out of the previous nuclear deal, saying that postponing Iran's nuclear capabilities wasn't good enough, and that you had to suffocate Iran out. Then, prior to the current round of elections that happened, several months ago, in October of 2024, Trump also publicly said that he calls upon Israel to also take out Iran's nuclear facilities, bomb them out of the sky. The United States should support them. Then Trump comes into office and he says, Trump famously doesn't want to engage the United States in wars. And he says, actually, we can go the negotiating route. And at first, there was a lot of rumors that Trump is going to demand the complete dismantling of Iran's nuclear capabilities. In fact, the United States seemingly is at least suggesting it's going to be okay with Iran actually just lowering the amount of enriched uranium it has and lowering the enrichment capabilities, which is pretty tantamount to the previous nuclear deal that Trump pulled out of, i.e. delaying Iran's capability to move ahead with the nuclear program. Why is anyone taking out Iran's nuclear facilities? First of all, Iran is smart. Iran learned from previous mistakes that other countries made. Iraq and Syria both tried to develop their own nuclear programs. Both were attacked by Israel, and both were destroyed. Iraq in 1981 and Syria in 2007, because the nuclear facilities were concentrated in one place. Here, Iran separated their nuclear enrichment sites. Their ballistic missiles are developed in one place, and the fuel in somewhere else, the enrichment programs in somewhere else. Everything is separated throughout Iran, so it's much harder to strike. They're also buried deep into mountains, such that it would require a very big military operation to take out the nuclear facilities now. It was leaked, I think, just last week, that Israel had planned a big military operation to take out Iran's nuclear facilities. And even in that leak, it said that Israel is not actually planning only bombings. They were also going to land commando units because you cannot just do this with bombs from the sky. Ultimately, though, if this were to go through a military route of taking out their nuclear capabilities, it would have to be something that had the umbrella defense and the blessing of the United States, because Israel cannot contain the possibility that it tries to do this and fails, or it tries to do this and the operation gets messy, and then the United States says to some extent you're on your own. Chances are the United States wouldn't say that, but Israel, despite its rhetoric, is very unlikely to do that without getting the United States to say okay. So in that sense, it really depends on where the winds are blowing with the Trump administration. You know, the one thing I say that Trump is unpredictable, and he's very unpredictable on most of his policies. However, the one thing that he has been fairly consistent with is that despite a lot of rhetoric, such as take out the nuclear facilities, such as raining hell on Gaza if all the hostages don't come back by that famous Saturday, ultimately, he does actually prefer diplomatic routes to engaging in warfare. We've seen this with Iran. We've seen this with advancing negotiations between Israel and Hamas. We're seeing this with Russia and Ukraine. Trump ultimately does make a lot of threats and maybe would make good on those threats when it comes to military force, but in practice, prefers the diplomatic route. Is Iran just stalling? Is it using that as a tactic? Possibly. And that's a very big fear in Israel and in a lot of parts of the Arab world. There's a lot of fear that Iran is just using this as a stalling tactic. It remains to be seen, but it is very clear that the United States would prefer that diplomatic route. We'll see. Right now, the teams are theoretically working on a negotiation draft to see what that deal would include. Maybe we'll be smarter in a couple of days. We'll start to see what that deal might include, and then we'll see, actually, is there any teeth behind the deal, or are we looking at the same type of deal like 2015?
Alon, as always, good to see you. Alon uploads his own Middle East updates on his personal YouTube channel. You can go over and subscribe to him there. As always, good to see you. We'll talk soon. Have a good night.